Austin Cindric, Cup Series rookie for Team Penske, wins the Daytona 500. Let's discuss. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove, coming to you live once again from Daytona International Speedway. I'm currently atop the NASCAR Cup Series garages, or at least some of them, inside the UNOH fan zone. It has been a wild weekend. I've got a video coming soon, later this week, recapping my experiences at my first ever Daytona 500. But tonight, we're reacting to the race itself. In many ways, this was a quintessential Daytona 500. It started out a little rowdy. Guys were a little aggressive. We didn't have a big crash on lap 15 like we did last year, but we did have a flip near the end of stage one. Actually ended stage one under caution with Harrison Burton getting airborne after spinning off the front bumper of Brad Keselowski. Stage two then was a little drier. Guys played it safer, a lot more single file, choo-choo train until the very end again when Martin Truex Jr. made a great move to win actually stage one and stage two. Then stage three came and all bets were off. At that point, some of the heavyweights, some of the veterans had already been knocked out earlier, so you had a lot of young drivers, but more importantly, in the closing 20 or 30 laps, I noticed that you had a lot of young drivers who'd never won the Daytona 500 at the front of the field. Even some veterans who'd never won the Daytona 500, like Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch, nursing that right front along. So each stage had its own character, its own personality. In typical NASCAR fashion, we saw some weird, wacky things happen. Like in stage one, two drivers from separate teams lost wheels. Like the whole wheel came off the car. Like in the case of Kaz Grala and the money team, it looked like they just didn't get that lug nut tight, so might see some suspensions coming. But in the case of Justin Haley, it looked like maybe something in the front of the car shredded or broke and broke the wheel, broke the actual hub itself, and that's what caused the wheel to fall off. I don't know, but either way, you don't usually see wheels come off cars. This year with the single lug nut, maybe it'll be slightly more frequent, but you saw two very similar incidents in the first stage. Of course, this race had a red flag at the end of stage, actually at the very end of the race in stage three. And then lastly, in typical Daytona 500 fashion, you had a surprise winner, a rookie, a driver making, I think, only his sixth ever NASCAR Cup Series start. Yes, he's won a ton of Xfinity races the last 2 years. He's been this close to being a back-to-back Xfinity Series champion. So we know Austin Cindric can drive. We obviously know Penske and Ford was really fast all weekend long, but still a surprise winner nonetheless. I'll talk about some of the top finishers, and yes, I will put this race on the Groovy gauge at the end. But first, I actually want to start with the finish of this race. It's what everyone's going to remember most. It's what's currently probably on most of your minds. It's freshest in your memory. On the final restart, it was overtime, of course. Again, typical Daytona 500, overtime with the sun down. Austin Cindric had the choice of lining up on the inside or the outside. He chose the outside because he assumed his teammate Ryan Blaney would let him in. And sure enough, they did. Blaney backed off a little bit, let Cindric drop down in front of him. A teammate deal, a Penske deal to pretty much ensure the two of them would lead the pack on the white flag lap. I thought maybe Blaney with one of his best friends, Bubba Wallace, lined up behind him. I thought maybe Blaney would go rogue and try something, but Bubba had a ton of right front damage. I don't know if that car was as good as it was before the final caution. So no, Cindric and Blaney worked together until literally the last 300 yards when Blaney did try to go to the outside, and he had enough of a run. I think Ryan Blaney was going to win this race if Cindric didn't, wedge him up in the fence, but I understand it's last lap, last football field of the Daytona 500, you're going to do what you got to do. If that includes putting your teammate, just rubbing him into the fence a little bit, you're going to do it. So I don't fault Cindric for that, but I did think for a second Blaney was going to get the win. And then after they rubbed and got in the fence a little bit, I thought Bubba Wallace, who's finished second in the Daytona 500 before back in 2018, who won the most recent points-paying race at a super speedway at Talladega last fall, I thought Bubba in the McDonald's machine had a shot for just a moment, but he comes up second once again. Ryan Blaney, I think, still crossed the line in the top five, but it's Austin Cindric who is the star of the show. He's actually still celebrating in victory lane, a couple hundred yards that way. I can see it. Let's talk about Austin Cindric. We all know Cindric as a great Xfinity Series racer. Obviously, he won 6 races in 2020 and won the championship. He backed that up with 5 more wins last year and came up 2 turns short from being a back-to-back Xfinity Series champion, a bump and run away effectively from back-to-back Xfinity championships. He's been tied to Ford for the longest time. He's been tied to Penske the last few years, but go back a few years, go back 3 or 4 years to his early days in the Xfinity Series, back when sometimes he'd drive that 60 car, that cursed 60 car for Roush. Austin Cindric in many ways earned the nickname Austin Spindric because he was over-aggressive, often made mistakes, felt like he was involved in an incident every other week. He's maybe part of the reason why that 60 car was sort of considered cursed for a time being. So in 3-4 years, young, late teenager, 19-year-old Austin Cindric has blossomed into a budding NASCAR star. I wasn't sold entirely at the end of 2019, and that was starting to get sold in 2020 when he started to win consistently. But even in 2020, Reddick, Bell, Custer had all graduated. I was like, yeah, the competition in Xfinity, all that good. He won the championship that year, and that certainly caught my and many others' attention. He's become more than a road course guy. He's good on ovals. He can win anywhere. He's great at super speedway racing, apparently. He was pushing and working with, in many cases, his former teammate Brad Keselowski really well. So you have to respect how much Austin Cindric has grown in the past 4 years. He went from being a teenager who was new on the scene, maybe a little overconfident, a little in over his head, to now a Daytona 500 champion, driving for one of the most recognizable teams in the garage, driving for Roger Penske himself, the captain. Austin Cindric has come a long way, so his rise over the last few years is quite remarkable. So it was cool to see him get the win tonight. He ran up front all night long. The Fords, much like in the dual races, were very organized and seemed to be the best overall in a pack. Early on, some of the Toyotas, they mounted a good charge to battle with the Fords and some of the Chevys. And even at the end, with damage, Bubba Wallace, Kyle Busch were still in contention. But the Fords were really good. The RFK Fords were good. The Penske Fords were good. Almirola was up in the mix at the end, so SHR had a presence, but Briscoe was up in the top 5. He finished in the top 5. Ford across the board was really, really good, but let's talk about one Ford driver who went for a very scary ride early on in this race. Harrison Burton, another rookie, was leading the outside lane, running up front, trying to win stage 1 when he got turned by Brad Keselowski on the exit of turn 2 and ended up flipping. The first flip in the next-gen car. Wasn't the same as Myatt Snyder's flip last night, but it's worth noting he was okay. The car held up. I know safety concerns with the next-gen were somewhat of a concern middle of last year. On that note, I will say Ricky Stenhouse's hit late in this race when he went into the outside wall here on the front stretch. The in-car camera they showed, I assume they showed it on Fox, they showed it on the big screens here. His head snapped forward a lot. Thank goodness for a Hans device. That probably saved his life right there. Obviously, Hans devices have been saving lives for a couple decades now, but just wanted to mention, that did look like a violent hit. So I'm sure the next gen is going to undergo more development as the year and years go on. In the case of the wheels, which we saw a couple issues, I'm sure some development may need to happen there. Maybe some changes, or maybe it was just an inexperienced team like the Money team making a mistake. Maybe that's the most viable conclusion. Only other big takeaway I want to make regarding all the different wrecks, because we did see a good amount of wrecks, especially late in this race. Brad Keselowski seemed to be in the middle of a lot of them. He, twice tonight, set off a big wreck by spinning someone on corner exit. He did it again later in turn 4 when he spun Stenhouse. It was weird. It's like a lot of the race, people were bump drafting in the corners pretty aggressively. Certainly on the backstretch when it was straight, they would bump draft a lot, but I didn't really see anything obvious Keselowski was doing wrong, maybe just pushing a little too hard at times. Like in the case of the Burton one, Burton had been squirrely for a couple laps. He looked really loose, young guy holding on for dear life. I think Keselowski probably should have had more awareness there and backed off, given him some space, or worked with somebody else to try and shuffle him out of line. I have no idea, but that one I can put on Keselowski. I mean, they both, I guess, are on Keselowski, but we saw all night long, guys were really loose on corner exit on that transition off the banking. So yeah, maybe just wrong place, wrong time, but that set off a couple wrecks. That was really the biggest trend I could see all race long. You saw some tandem drafting for short spurts, and I thought that was kind of fun. It reminded me sort of 2012, which is one of my favorite super speedway packages, where they'd run in a 2 and 3 wide pack, but every now and then a couple guys near the front could latch on for half a straightaway and make huge gains and make moves, weave through the field. We saw that a lot tonight, and I thought it was really good. It looked different than the most recent Gen 6 package, but I still thought it looked good. Not quite as big of runs being generated, so you didn't see really any super late blocks tonight, unless you count the very end, Blaney getting wedged into the wall. So I don't know, I thought it was a happy medium. I think the drivers should be okay with the slower pack speeds for one. I know we had a blowover, and we had an Xfinity blowover last night, but I know we had a blowover in the Cup race, but the speeds were lower and the runs were less rapid, I suppose. So I think the drivers should, as pack racing goes, I think they should have no real issues with this rules package. Real quick, looking at some of the top finishers, my pick coming into the weekend, Ryan Blaney, ends up top 5, ends up 4th, another solid super speedway race for him. Eric Almirola, in what may be his final Daytona 500 ever, finishes 5th. Kyle Busch, with a damaged race car, comes home 6th. Last year's winner, Michael McDowell, ends up with the top 10, accomplished it in many of the same ways he did it last year. Stayed out of trouble, lurked in the back until it was time to strike. David Reagan for Rick Ware Racing, another past Daytona winner, not the 500, but a past Daytona winner. He gets a top 10. Ty Dillon, 11th place, his first race back as a full-time Cup Series driver, deserves a shout out, but there you have it. Those are some of your top finishers. It was not a good day for drivers named Ross Chastain, who was caught up in that first big wreck. He finished last. Harrison Burton, William Byron suffered a huge hit on that wreck as well. There are a lot of contenders taken out in the Harrison Burton flip. It wasn't all about Burton. Denny Hamlin was caught up in that. It was the first, I didn't realize this, but I heard a stat. It was the first Daytona 500 that Denny Hamlin did not finish. he has finished every Daytona 500 he's ever run. Obviously, he's won 3 of them, but the fact that he never DNF'd until today, that's insane. I was disappointed that Greg Biffle had engine issues early on because he was hanging in the lead draft. You never know, but what it is. I was also disappointed late. There were a couple wrecks that took out some guys that were having really good runs. Guys like Eric Jones, Chris Buescher, Kyle Larson having an unusually good super speedway race, Ricky Stenhouse. Noah Gragson, who qualified for the show with Beard Motorsports, was up in the top 10 late until he got caught up in someone else's wreck. So typical Daytona stuff. Like I said, this was a very standard Daytona 500. Like, a lot of action, a lot of drama, a lot of shocking moments, surprising moments, devastating moments, thrilling moments. It was a very typical Daytona 500, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing, like it was predictable, like, oh man, same old, same old. No, I mean that in a very positive way. We all like the Daytona 500 here, right? I mean, it's the biggest, most popular race on the schedule for a reason. The spectacle was there, a sellout crowd, over 100,000 fans in the grandstands, probably 40, 50,000 more fans all scattered throughout the grounds. It was a great day to be out at the racetrack. So with that being said, I'm going to put this on the Groovy Gauge, but I also want to talk about that a little bit more detail. I didn't watch much of the TV broadcast. I watched, basically during stage 2, I watched a good portion of the TV broadcast, and I understood why there was a lot of complaining on social media about too many commercials. A few missed camera angles and stuff here and there, whatever. It's the first real big race of the season. I'll cut them some slack. But the amount of commercials Fox sold and ran for this race, it's predictable because this was a race on Fox, not FS1, not cable. This was a race on Fox. It's the biggest race, best ratings of the year. It's predictable that they would oversell this, that they would jam as many commercials as they can because they can sell those commercials for more money. It's all about the money, and they paid $4.4 billion for a 10-year deal. Like, they got to make their money back. I completely understand. But it sounds like, for many of you at home, it ruined the viewing experience, especially in the first half. The number of full-screen commercials over green flag racing, it sounds like, was exorbitant. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but here's my take. In 2022, there are far too many other entertainment options out there that are commercial free for NASCAR broadcasts to feature this many full screen interrupting commercial breaks. Right now you can log into Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max. If you have YouTube Premium or ad blocker, you can watch a ton of kind of hours, millions of hours of content, in many cases great content, without any commercials or very few interruptions. That didn't exist in 2001 when Fox was first starting their current NASCAR TV coverage. Now, I don't remember how many commercials there were back in the day, but in 2001, I think the average American consumer was okay sitting through a few commercial breaks here and there. But in 2022, consumers have so many other entertainment choices. If you're still running a ton of full screen commercial breaks, because I counted at one point 3 different commercial breaks in like a 20-minute span. There's at one point they went to commercial, came back, it was still green flag racing. All they did was a crank it up segment, and then they went back to commercial. In 2022, consumers don't have to sit through commercials. So if you keep going to commercials, people are going to turn your product off. So I think Fox, in many ways, it sounds like, did the Daytona 500 a disservice. I've been critical of them many times in the past for many other reasons. I don't know how the booth was. Tony Stewart sounded okay, but this is an easy one. When the new contracts come around in 2025, if Fox re-ups, which it sounds like they might, if a new company like ESPN or who knows, Amazon comes in, I would hope that they would change the model a bit so as to include more side-by-side commercials. I understand you gotta have commercials, side-by-side commercials under green, maybe some full screens during cautions, I'd understand that. Or maybe a whole new streaming service, something where I can pay $10, $15 a month to get commercial-free NASCAR content. I would pay for that, and I think at least thousands more like me would do the same. This decade, NASCAR and its partners need to modernize how they broadcast races to fans. Full screen commercials every 5 minutes, that is 2002, not 2022. American consumers have too many other options. They're going to turn the product off. So that's all I have to say about the broadcast. As far as the event being here in person, it was a blast. Weather was beautiful. Thank goodness we finally caught a break with the rain. The crowd was packed. The energy was through the roof. This was my first Daytona 500 ever, so I knew it was going to be busy. I knew it was going to feel more lively, more energetic than a typical NASCAR Cup Series race would, but I was not quite prepared for the sights and sounds I took in today. You'll see a video. I filmed a video while I was here out in the fan zone, out in the midway and stuff. I filmed a lot of my fan experience type things, or a lot of the fan experience stuff that fans can enjoy here at the Daytona 500. So you'll see my firsthand experience here very, very soon, but I just wanted to say that. If you're a fan who's never been to the Daytona 500, or if you haven't been in a long, long time, I highly recommend it. I live all the way out in Texas, other side of the Gulf of Mexico. I will be back here as many years as I can, every year if I can. This was life-changing. So I had a ton of fun. I think the in-person experience was great. It was helped by tremendous weather, beautiful Florida weather. So on that note, I do want to put this thing on the groovy gauge as, I don't know, the Thunderbird's still going. It's pitch black. I can't see into the sky. There's something. You guys hear that, right? Boom, the groovy gauge followed me out to Florida. Like I said earlier, this was kind of a predictable Daytona 500 as far as all the different beats, the side-by-side at first, big wreck, single file, more big wrecks at the very end. Like, it was very predictable in that respect, but it was not predictable when it came to who was running up front and when. Like, Ricky Stenhouse led the outside lane up to the lead late in this race. I didn't see that coming. I know he's a good plate racer, but I didn't expect JTG Doherty equipment to make that kind of a charge. Overall, though, I thought it was a really good race. Some of the big wrecks, obviously, especially when you consider the part shortages, make you grimace a little, but overall I thought this was a very, very solid Daytona 500. It sounds like the coverage left a lot to be desired, so that might jade some of your scores if you watched at home, but being here in person, following along closely, there were a ton of storylines. There was a ton of intrigue. My heart was pounding out of my chest those last few laps because I didn't know who was going to win. I didn't know what was going to happen. We've seen fiery, violent crashes late in these races. It was tense. It was edge of your seat stuff. So overall, I'm going to give this race an 85% on the groovy gauge. Was not fantastic. Wasn't the most thrilling Daytona 500 I've ever seen, but it was up there. It was very good. It did not disappoint, at least not here in person. I'm just glad it wasn't a train the whole time. You know, with the next-gen car being so new, with all the parts issues, I thought there was a real possibility it was going to be a train for 100, 150 laps, kind of like 2013 was, the first race with the Gen 6. But I'm very happy and in many ways relieved to see that it was not that kind of race. Guys were going for it. As I noted in the duels, when they did run single file quite a bit, it looked like with this car, you could make moves if you wanted to. Tonight, finally, they wanted to, and it was a good show, I think, for the fans watching, at least in person, hopefully at home as well. But those are my quick thoughts about the Daytona 500. I appreciate you guys watching. I've got a flight tomorrow to head back to Texas. We can get back to with our regularly scheduled programming, but thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for the support. It's thanks to you guys that I'm here experiencing this right now in person. So I truly appreciate it. Very, very grateful for all of your support. That's gonna do it for this episode. A special thank you to my Patreon supporters as well. You guys go above and beyond to support the channel. I truly appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to leave a like on this video. It helps me out. And subscribe if you're new to the channel because we talk racing nearly every day here during the season. Like I said, some more Daytona content will be coming up in the next day or so be looking out for that. That's gonna do it from Daytona Beach, Daytona International Speedway. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the 64th annual Daytona 500. Congrats to Austin Cindric and Team Penske. This was a blast. I'll be back next year.